Let's dive into the big topic of conversation, obviously, in Leafs Nation. That's the big trade on Friday. Where were you when it went down, and what did you think initially of it?
Well, full disclosure, I was out to dinner with some friends, late dinner, halfway through a glass of wine. So that tells you how much my radar was up for that kind of move. But it was pretty, I would say it was a surprise to see the Leafs get O'Reilly. I think maybe just that they acted so quickly, kind of jumped the market in some ways. We've seen a couple other big trades, of course, but not a lot of action league wide just yet. And I think they didn't want any chance of it leaking out. Sometimes in the old days, or probably two other teams, they finally get to a deal at 11 p.m. at night on a Friday. They probably agree that they'll announce it Saturday morning. But the Leafs like to make sure that it's not going to get out ahead of time, and so they announced it when it was finally done.
To the best of your knowledge, how long were they working on this deal with St. Louis? I mean, there's been some hints and reports, I believe Elliot Friedman putting out there that maybe they were in on Barbashev as well. But how long do you think they were working on this thing?
Well, I think their interest goes back to earlier in the season. In December, they were linked to O'Reilly, and at that point, it wasn't clear St. Louis would be in a position as a seller the way they've become now. And I think it heated up last week. And, I think some of that was because Ryan O'Reilly himself, if he was going to be moved, liked the idea of a move to Toronto. And so I think that helped make the fit. I mean, that the player fits, and certainly Noel Acciari does, and what the Leafs want. And I think they were looking for specific elements to their lineup rather than just getting the biggest name or the player most likely to score the most goals. I think that they were looking for the flexibility that they get with two guys that can play wing and play center, can kill penalties, all those types of things. And so, the last few days, last week, it really heated up, and they involved Minnesota at the last day to get that extra little bit of retention, and the deal got done. But I think that the conversations stem back months and then really took on some serious tones, in the days before Friday.
Chris, obviously, when a trade like this goes down, most people are looking at, his stat packs and the numbers and what does he bring and how many goals does he score and that kind of thing. But what do you feel about Ryan O'Reilly and just his character and what he brings, leadership, his experience in the playoffs? He's a guy who seems to want to be here. He's willing to play a 3-3 to get here and get that jersey on. And, what can that mean to the Leafs coming down in the playoffs to have a guy like that added to their roster, numbers aside?
Well, it just seems like he ticks every box, right? And starting Saturday, I was reaching out to people in my network around the league just to gauge their thoughts. I honestly didn't find one person who didn't like the deal for the Leafs. And let's be honest, there's lots of people out there who love to hate the Leafs. The Leafs are the Cowboys or the Yankees. I recognize those in our positions. We overhype them. We talk about them a lot. So other teams, at times I think like to poke fun at the Leafs when things happen. But in this case, I didn't find anyone who didn't like the deal. And I think that says a lot about who Ryan O'Reilly is. Even Noel Acciari. Like, I get that he's not the headliner in this deal, but I think he really fits a specific role that the Leafs can use, and just makes them a much deeper team. Players that have been playing regularly in the lineup to this stage in the season now are not going to get in unless there's injuries or other things that arise. And with O'Reilly, there's naturally going to be some questions about his season. It's the worst year by production he's had, I think, since he was an NHL rookie. Got a big dash number on there on a Blues team that just didn't have a lot of success this year. And so when you're making this deal from Toronto's end of it, I think you have to be comfortable that you understand the reasons why that might be happening, and that he still has gas in the tank. And I still think he does. The other thing too, he missed 6 weeks or so with a broken foot. I mean, that's the kind of injury that there's usually a clear recovery time. It's a bone healing. It's not likely to see a recurrence there. So it's not as though that's a chronic issue for him, which is different maybe a little bit than Nick Foligno a few years ago, which I think a lot of people around the Leafs are trying to compare the two, because he did have a pretty serious back injury and wasn't able to contribute much after the deal the Leafs made with Columbus 2 years ago. So I think that given that what he's done, what he's known of as a teammate, the guy is, he can play third line center for them if that's how things ultimately end up. I just think that this is a home run type of deal. There's risk, of course. You're giving up all these picks and things, but there's no guarantees that this will equate to more success in the first round. But I think you must feel better in the Leafs front office or in the coaching room and even the dressing room with this lineup than the one you had last week.
Yeah, I won't lie. Both of us, Jay and I, are both still jacked. We did an emergency pod on Saturday. We're jacked. We love the trade. I just love the fits with Acciari. I think we've already seen what he can bring to the table. And you look at Ryan O'Reilly, the pedigree, winning a Conn Smythe, winning a cup, and your leadership, what he means on the ice, off the ice. I just think it's a home run for the Leafs, and they had to take that swing here in this scenario. So I ask you this: we're still a couple weeks away from the trade deadline. Are they done, and could they potentially be after a defenseman? And how much stock do you put into Kyle Dubas's conversation following the trade about not wanting to subtract from his roster?
Well, I don't think they're done, but it's going to be hard to make the next move, no matter, even if it's something smaller. I mean, between the cap ramification things that they have to deal with, even if they just don't have a lot of picks, right? They're down to only a couple picks in the 2023 draft. They don't have their second rounder in 2024 or 2025 now. Like there's still things they can do. Don't get me wrong, but there's not a lot of obvious things for them to deal unless they are, either dealing a prospect or perhaps someone off the roster. And so I think that they'll look at everything, but they might ultimately find that there's just not upgrades out there. I mean, because if you're trading for someone right now, you've got to feel either that player is better than someone in your lineup or that you need a depth option. I don't think they actually need a depth option on D. I think you could argue that they need an upgrade in the top six. But, what are you subtracting? Like if you went out and tried to get Matthias Ekholm or, any of the guys, Jacob Chikrin's name's out there, and I don't think the Leafs have much interest in him. But the point is, if you're getting players that would obviously still, make the Leafs top six with the current guys, those are usually 2 first rounders is the ask going back. And the Leafs, I'm not sure if you really want to trade 2 first rounders into the future at this point. So the truth of the matter is, I think the biggest splash has been made. It would be a huge surprise to me if they made a bigger trade than the one they made last Friday. But I think that their mind is open to doing whatever they can do because we all know how much is riding on this season, and they still have 10 days where they can make a deal here. I mean, why would you close up shop just yet? I think you got to explore the market. Maybe some of the prices come down, and maybe something falls into line that makes a team better. Heading into the stretch drive.
Yeah, and Chris, as he says, he doesn't want to take away from his own roster, and we're talking about draft picks and whatnot. It seems like that's kind of going to be one of the main things, if not the only thing, going out the door. And that, I mean, you mentioned that no one's really upset about this O'Reilly trade. Only thing I've seen is people going, "You're giving up a lot of picks. You're giving up a lot of picks." But it's like, it's shit or get off the pot. Do you want to win this year? Or are you making a push because if you go, I'm not going to make that deal to make my team better because I don't want to give up that first rounder who may or may not make us do what exactly where we are right now in 5 years? Like it's do or die. And it seems like Dubas is making a run at it. And why wouldn't you when you're top 3-4 in the whole league all year long? But I think people lose fact of the sight that Matthew Nyes could be an addition that you don't have to do anything with, just allow him to walk in. And the only thing I see that could maybe work is just add some kind of a defenseman somehow and maybe some prospects or a couple more picks or something for that. But it seems like it's hard to be going to be hard to do anything else at this point. What do you see happening if they do make a deal?
Well, and I'm with you on the draft pick conversation. Like, look, the Leafs first rounder this year is going to fall somewhere between 24 and 32 probably.
Yeah.
And if you look historically, there's certainly good players that have been drafted in that range, but often they're not becoming good players for 5 or 6 years down the road. Truly impactful players at the NHL level. I mean, 5 or 6 years from now, who knows what's left of this Leafs roster, what this looks like. And so, any team that's had any amount of success in the last 10 years, whether it's Chicago, Pittsburgh, LA, any of these teams, Tampa, that has hung banners in their rink or multiple banners, they've traded away a ton of first round picks because they recognize it was worth selling the future to make the present better when they had some special players on the roster. And I think that's, it's just a prudent thing to do. It's basically a second rounder almost going for O'Reilly, especially if the Leafs do win a couple rounds in the playoffs. It gets pushed lower and lower. You have to give up a second, essentially the equivalent of a second for Acciari. There was a lot of contending teams that had interest in him as a nice depth addition for their third or fourth line. And then, there's a third round pick going out there because there's salary retention and a fourth round pick. Because anyway, the point is that's a total market value trade, no matter how you slice it. Now another team might have looked at that and said, we wouldn't want to pay that for O'Reilly, and that's their prerogative. But I think that that's totally in line with what we've seen in other deals. And so where that leaves the Leafs now, I think you're right. I mean, we're probably looking at a depth move unless Kyle Dubas is once again sort of, trying to get us off the scent by saying that he doesn't want to trade off his roster. I mean, if he trades something off his roster, there's players in the final year of their deals, whether it's Alex Kerfoot, Justin Hall, Pierre Engvall, David Kampf, all these guys are on expiring deals. And if you traded their salary away, you could create room to bring in something back. If they're really not doing that, then I think we're down to a depth addition in terms of another trade. And then, as you mentioned, Matthew Nyes, I would expect to be pulling on a Leaf sweater within days of the last game for the University of Minnesota next month. So, the team is more or less set, unless something else just comes out of the clear blue sky. But I think that they're smart to get ahead of the deadline. It gives the guys themselves an extra week and a half to get a little more comfortable coming in to play with the team. And then it just takes some of the pressure off those last 2 days when, sometimes things go wrong on March 3rd. You play with fire if you get close to that deadline and something falls through and you don't have a backup plan, then you might end up with nothing. I mean, at least at this point, the Leafs, I think, have really made themselves better. And, my final word, too, on the price is that I think there's a world where Ryan O'Reilly stays in Toronto. Now, it's premature to have that talk, but I know for certain that he's on their list of teams that he likes. He wanted to come here and play here. If this is a positive experience, they might have given that up, not for a rental player. And who knows, maybe they even somewhere along the line get him to take a little less than the market might pay him, the way they did with Mark Giordano. I mean, that remains a possibility here. And that's part of the sort of intangible benefit of this move as well.
And the deal gets even better in that respect, too. I think the only person worth multiple first-round picks right now is Brandon Pridham. The capologist for the Leafs has done an incredible job, man. And to include Minnesota in that deal, I thought was amazing, too. Last one, we'll let you go. So they moved the deadline to a Friday this year. You have any reason why? And what's your expectation league-wide? Obviously, from the Leafs perspective, we're waiting to see what Boston does, Tampa does, and other teams around the league.
So I think that there's a specific formula in the CBA, and don't quote me exactly, but in terms of the number of days from the end of the regular season to when the trade deadline is, it's something like 6 weeks or 45 days. And because the regular season we're still getting back on a normal schedule from COVID, the regular season isn't ending at its typical time. I think it's ending midweek in April, if I'm not mistaken, and it usually ends on a weekend. So essentially, the easy answer to why it's been moved, I think, is we're just getting the schedule. They're still trying to push the schedule in as much as they can to get the cup awarded and get the draft done, in June, and then, have a July 1st free agency. So we're probably, the takeaway from that is we're probably going back to a normal Monday trade deadline next year, because I think we'll be back kind of on what you call a regular schedule by then. I actually like the Friday, though. It doesn't ruin the weekend immediately before, because when you have a Monday trade deadline, there's a lot of stuff that goes on Saturday and Sunday, so you might as well not have a weekend then at all. It's I think it's going to be still a busy period. I really do think that, there's a lot going on league wide. Unfortunately, we've seen some of the biggest names already traded, so maybe that takes away some of the excitement from the day itself. But there's still some dominoes to play here, and I think there's teams like Nashville and Washington, in particular, that could move into the seller category and have some players that could spice up the deadline here yet still.